Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hi, folks. Thanks very much. I'm Tom Ivester, an alcoholic. Most folks start out with a real upbeat, positive thing, but I know how word gets around in AA, and let me share with you a personally tragic kind of thing that just happened. I'll get that out of the way, and then we'll get down to the business of talking about new life. The wife and I, 2 weeks ago, were up in Canada and visited with our folks, and her folks, my in-laws. And I was kind of reminded of a friend of ours, whether you knew him or not, but a friend of ours from California, Norm Alfie, who was talking about how life hinges on seconds and inches. That 1 second sooner or later, the course of our lives change, and 1 inch further or nearer, and the course of our lives change. And how true it is. We had a delightful time with our relatives. Today, my wife got 2 phone calls from Canada. Her only sister had a major stroke and is in the hospital now, struggling. And a little later, we got a call, and the fiance of my niece, a 20-year-old boy, who 2 weeks ago gave us a beautiful jazz concert on a beautiful lake out in western Canada. And today, very tragically, went off a cliff and died. So you never know what's going to happen. There's seconds and inches that separate us from a different destiny. And so I had to get that out of the way because I knew the word had gotten around a little bit. There's some stuff that happened that that's what I was tied up with a while ago. And so I wanted to just tell you what it was so that the story will be consistent anyway, because when stories travel, they really have a tendency to get out of shape, don't they? So that's what it is. You pray for my sister and for the others if you would. I said I'm an alcoholic. I'm a member of the primary purpose group of AA in Southern Pines, North Carolina, my home group. I was gently nudged into Alcoholics Anonymous February the 2nd of 57, and by the amazing grace of God, leading to what the slogan, the theme of this conference is about, we came to believe. And that grace of God was demonstrated by the members of Alcoholics Anonymous who greeted me. And I came to believe sufficient that I haven't looked back since. I've been sober since the day I walked in, and I'm deeply grateful for that. I'm also proud to be playing second fiddle to Sis. What a delightful, vivacious, enthusiastic, genuine member of AA. And that's just a real pleasure. And so I truly salute that lady. That's just great. Just great. And I am delighted to be here. I want to congratulate you. I'm begging already. I just got up here now. I'm pleading for water. I want to congratulate you folks on putting together an excellent conference. And I know you've heard that a lot, but I do go to a fair number of these things, and this one is a beautifully organized, beautifully put together conference. And as some of my other buddies have said, it's not only well organized, but there's a contagious spirit here that's tremendously important. So I'm delighted to be here with you. I appreciate the graphic. Appreciate this great banner here and the fine work. I appreciate the folks with whom I'm sharing the program this weekend. Everybody here is a friend, and everybody here, I swear to God, was sprinkled with magic or something this weekend. What powerful, powerful sharing. And I was just honored to be in the presence of these folks. And so I'm deeply grateful. Tomorrow, my good buddy, Hank from North Carolina, will put the coup de grace on this thing, and he will close us out in inimitable style. So by all means, come and eat something with us in the morning. Grits, I hope. Tried to eat those potatoes in there this morning, and man, that ain't for breakfast. That is not breakfast food. So good time, and thanks very much for the warm welcome. And now I want to tell you as much as I can. I warned Jody that I was going to talk real fast. It won't sound like it to you or Jody, but it'll be as fast as I can go. But I know that some folks here wanting to dance, and I'm wanting to watch it. So I'll get out of the way as quick as I can. I am delighted to be here. I'm an alcoholic. I don't know particularly why. a lot of theories about alcoholism and where it comes from, and lots of them are interesting. Most of them are totally unimportant, but they're interesting. And one that I like better than others is I like the one that sort of supposes that there's something different about the brain of an alcoholic, that we somehow seem to be endowed with brains superior to average people, that we're just folk who are bursting with talent and creative genius that's just straining to get out. Some theorists say that's why we drink, is just to quiet down that rampaging mind. That is I've been hearing that ever since I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never heard it discussed anywhere else, except but it's a good one. I like that one a great deal. And there's some evidence to support that. I'm constantly amazed at people I see sober up and find talents and abilities and skills that they didn't even know they had. And I'm just constantly amazed at that. I'm not particularly one of those. Well, yeah, I really am. Mine just haven't come out yet. I'm a guy. I think very much like most other alcoholics. I've never heard alcoholics tell their stories that I didn't identify with since my second year in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't identify with anybody the first couple of years, but I hear very few people that I don't totally identify with. Because like most folk, and I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of causation, just suffice it to say, I was a guy who grew up extremely uncomfortable with this thing called life. Yeah, and it was essentially because of stuff you hear all the time, of the way I interacted with the world, the way I felt about who I was and how I fit in and all that. And more precisely, I was a guy who lived two totally different lives. I was a guy who had one life on the inside, quite another on the outside. On the inside, I was an extremely isolated guy who lived with a lot of fear, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of doubt, a lot of uncertainty. And that was an identity that not a human on this earth knew till I was sober a good while in Alcoholics Anonymous. I think it was very significant in the development of my alcoholism and certainly in my recovery. The other guy, the one that you saw, the public guy, was the fellow who was the polar opposite of that, trying to prove that the other wasn't so. And I was the guy that was loud, raucous, devil-may-care type of guy, the kind of guy that would do anything the mind could conceive. I never knew of anything I turned down on moral principles. That's how ludicrous for me to even talk about moral principles. I didn't turn nothing down. And so it was just that kind of wild, crazy guy running headlong through life. And so that's a difficult kind of a thing to live when you're torn in two different directions. You're two different people. In my early teens, I started to mess around with booze a little bit. I had my first show-enough important drink when I was 16. I mean, real liquor, my own, that I didn't steal from somebody. I mean, that was my liquor, and I drank that sucker with relish. I liked it. And the magic happened for me. That stuff did something for me tremendously important. I remember it as clearly as if it were today, and I was a guy transformed. I wasn't an alcoholic, not born, not instant, not at all. I was a guy who was imprisoned in the bondage of his skin, and that stuff turned me loose. Some people refer to it as a social lubricant, alcohol. That greased me up, I mean, real good. And it turned me loose. I was a guy freed from the captivity of his life, and I just fell in love with that way of life. It became my way to live. Everything I did revolved around alcohol. I didn't do anything that didn't have alcohol in it on purpose. I didn't walk, talk, dance, crawl, make love, nothing that didn't have booze involved in it. That just became the way of life. I liked it. I liked the excitement. I liked the trashy behavior. I liked the trashy people that did it with me. I just loved it. I loved the sense of anxiety that something's getting ready to jump off. And if it don't jump off pretty quick, I'm going to start something just to get it going. Now, I loved that. There was no real mystery to what happened. I was just a guy who loved that way of life, loved the lights and noise and all the action, and I just fell in love with it. And I'll tell you a little secret. Ain't two secrets. I've told everybody I've ever talked to. If it hadn't been for one thing, I'd be doing that tonight. I'm not here on moral grounds. You can hurry up believe I ain't no temperance worker. I like people who drink. Because that's one reason I like us, is that's who we are. We're just in a new habitat. But I like folks who drink. I enjoy them for a while, till they tell me the same joke like Harold told. That'd be rough if you were drunk. And then they tell it about the third time at the top of their voice, spitting on you at the same time. I get a little uptight with them then. But I just like drunks. I enjoy drunks for a while. There's some people who ought to drink. I mean, there's some people who ain't got no business not drinking. And I don't mean alcoholics, you know, not you, that's for sure. There's some people that are just painful to be around. I mean, they're just irritating. You know how you feel when somebody scrapes a blackboard, but they're Jesus. There's some people that affect me that way. I mean, they're just uptight and get me uptight. I'd buy them a drink, a big drink. And I tell you, I'm pretty generous. If somebody wants a drink, they better not ask me unless they really mean it. Because I guarantee you, I'll give them one that'll knock their eyes out. I don't feel bad about that. I just kind of consider that my personal recruiting program for AA. Only way I know to get here. So I just push them over on the way. Anyway, you get the point. I just love that stuff. And if it hadn't been for one thing, that's where it'd be. Now, I don't mean that I'm yearning to drink. Let me belay that notion before I forget it. Today I've got a new life. But I wouldn't have left that one because this one didn't look too good to me when I first looked it over. And so I guarantee you I'd have stayed there. It looked trashy to other folks. Now, I'm sure that nobody could understand my behavior when they would see me go through the gagging exercise in the morning. God almighty. Throwing up stuff that had never been seen by man. I mean, bad stuff. Sweating bullets, eyeballs run out on their stems, afraid of them to live, afraid of them to die. And, I mean, God knows, somebody observed that would think, Jesus, God, could you ever do that again? And then watch as soon as it's physically possible. Even before it's physically possible. And the minute I possibly could, turn that sucker up, take a drink, and you'd think you were drinking heavy water from an atom bomb. You know, that thing hit. And just feel it bouncing like a Mexican jumping beat. And just hoping and praying it'd stay. Sometimes it did. Most often it didn't the first time. Then it, good God, somebody opened the door. And then it'd come back. That's bad news, particularly when it comes back through your nose. Now that's smart. And somebody look at that. How on earth could you do it? It would make no sense to a logical thinker. It was the only thing that made sense to this guy. It was the only thing that made sense. Anything other would never have made sense to me. And so that's the kind of guy I was. And what happened was when I was, best I can tell, somewhere in my 18th year, I developed alcoholism. Now, I certainly didn't know it at the time. I was busy in the Aleutian Islands. I don't know what I was doing. I joined the Army, and they sent me up there to stand on a rock and guard it from somebody. If there's any Russians come over and try to take it, I was supposed to shoot them. I ain't seen nothing out there. I mean, nothing. But somewhere along in that exotic duty, it was where it happened. I don't think it's called by that. I think that, what do they call it, Tim? Exacerbated. That's a Kentucky word. It sped it up a little, I think, is what it did. And so I crossed the line, is what we call it. You don't see it in the book, but that's what we call it. We say cross the line. Now, I didn't have any clue about that till I got sober, started looking back. But when I look back, it was like Act 1, Act 2 was the story of my life. One was that kind of wild, crazy guy. I went unnoticed by me into a totally different thing when I crossed that line. And when I got sober and looked back, I could see the clear evidence that was invisible to me at the time that if I took a drink, I could not control my behavior. I could not predict what I would do. I lost the ability to control my drinking. And that's what happened when I was 18 years old. I had absolutely no clue of that. I just knew that I got into an awful lot of trouble. I had an awful lot of jackpots, and from that point forward, my life became a seemingly endless series of fiascos, misadventures, calamities, confusion, God knows what all. Jails, psych wards, hospital with stuff broke I didn't even know been hit, and it wasn't working. And I'll tell you the strange thing about alcoholism to me. I rarely hear anybody say this, and there's nothing unique about it, but I was a guy who never in my life, to my recollection, never in my life connected where I wound up with the first drink. I never connected consequences to action. The first time when I got in AA and heard people talking about it's the first drink that gets you, I thought that's the dumbest thing I'd ever heard grown folks say. I mean, my God, it was bizarre sounding to me. It sounded to me like when alcoholics took a drink, they had a running fit or something. You know, they just sort of fell out kicking. Well, I never did that. When I took a drink, all I did was take another drink. And another drink. And it wound up in jail in Georgia somewhere. Or married, for God's sakes. I literally woke up married to a woman I didn't even know. Never did get to know her. She saw what she had and left. So that was the story of my life. But I never once woke up, came to. I was a guy who had a lot of blackouts, and I was a guy who woke up in strange places. And I'll tell you, there's absolutely nothing funny about blackouts for about 10 years, man. They don't get funny. That's the most terrifying thing in the annals of alcoholism to me. And my life became a seemingly endless series of waking up in the latest wreckage of the past, wherever it might be, and go through that sort of panicky feeling of, where am I? What have I done? And I tell you, that's an awkward kind of a deal. I used to wake up mentally and not open my eyes because you never knew where you were going to be. And sometimes there's some very rude people around when you wake up. And they'll ask you stuff like, profound stuff like, who are you? You hate to say, well, let me think about it. Or even as bad, what are you doing here? And I hate to say, where am I? You know, that's right. But it'll make you flinchy about coming to your senses. I'll just give you one example. Well, maybe 3 or 4, but, well, one anyway. I woke up one morning, and I tell you, folks say alcoholics are fidgety, but not when you are like that, you know, waking up with that fear, what are you going to see? I woke up one morning, and I was in a bed. That was different. I knew it wasn't mine. And so I laid there with that sort of comatose posture. And there was a woman out in the kitchen. Maddest woman I had ever heard in my life. And she was talking about some sorry dude in her daughter's bed. Now, this brilliant alcoholic mind kicked in. I said, that girl's talking about me. And she was. Well, I finally, like a stealth bomber, I caught a little break in the action, and I shot out the door. Well, it wasn't bad. It was the house next door to mine. That ain't bad. I mean, by God, it's not like waking up in the wrong state. Yeah, at least I was in the neighborhood. Yes. Every once in a while, I get goose pimples. I talk to somebody in a prison that's doing long time for that. They got a name for that behavior. They don't call it a simple mistake. Well, that was the kind of stuff started happening. And never did I consecrate that behavior with the first drink. Not one time do I recall saying, geez, I got to do something about this. I always woke up, looked around, beat myself up, and wrote it off to being reckless, irresponsible, lacking in moral fiber, just a sorry human being is how I wrote that off. And that is honest to God what I believed. I never saw that behavior for what it was till I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll say one thing that sides a little toward editorial stuff, but not much. we beat around a word called denial an awful lot. An awful lot. God knows it's almost a catchword in Americana now for every human condition. And we use it a lot in regard to alcoholism. I'll tell you one place we don't use it, it's in the big book. You won't find it in there. Now, certainly the word existed, and I don't think as wordy as Bill was that he overlooked it. I don't think he used it because I don't think it applies. It's too lightweight for the condition. Because denial is essentially a battle with things that are closing in on you. It's pushing out stuff. Delusion is a different deal. Our book doesn't say it this way, but I think it refers to it as an inability to differentiate the true from the false. And I, honest to God, never saw that behavior till I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a guy on the way to a party who detoured and went too far. Never saw the behavior till I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, my life just sort of banged on in that style. I just went through it. So, my life happened so quickly. When I look at it to this day, I've got some fix on it now, but it happened so quickly and so madly that it was like a blur. It wasn't well defined with peaks and valleys. It was just sort of a continuing mess that just went on and on. And in a rushing hurry, I wound up in conditions that I didn't even know existed. I started drinking seriously when I was 16, had what I hope and pray was my last drink when I was 24. 8 short years, and in that 8 short years, screwed up everything I touched. When I stopped drinking at 24, and this is not melodrama by any stretch of the imagination, but when I sobered up and started to look at my life, to this day, I can't recall one single thing that I can point to with any pride or sense of achievement. Not one. I can't think of one human who wouldn't have been better off if they had never seen me. Not one. Not a single one who didn't get hurt, embarrassed, used, abused, misused, frustrated, dirty in the process. Not a single one. And you can hardly believe I'm not proud of that by any stretch. And so when I finally got thrown out of the military, I just sort of wondered where drunks go. Anywhere drunks went, that's where I went. And I wound up in the state of Michigan, up in the early 50s. That's where a bunch of drunks went, and I went. And I went to work for General Motors. And I always feel a little sense of risk when I say this, but I was employed to build Buick automobiles in 53 and 54. And I'm always afraid somebody's going to be here that bought one I built. I swear to God, if you did, I'm as sorry as I could be. But I didn't know. I just see a guy going down the road and the steering wheel comes off. Well, I didn't do well there. I worked in a city of 500,000 till my reputation got in front of me, and I wound up unemployed, darn near unemployable, in a city of 500,000 people. And I lived the last year of my drinking that sort of twilight zone existence that Mike and I were talking about today, that never land of being totally out of place wherever you are. And for that last year, there was that purity of existence of just drifting from one thing to another, living either on the street or in jail or in hospitals or psych wards or with some well-intended friend who took me in long enough, as long as they could stand me. And I wound up living a kind of life I didn't even know existed. It didn't exist in my little town where I grew up. But I mean, the land of big city street life. And I used to say I lived by my wits during that period, but that's not exactly true. I lived by my lack of character. Now, I'm no gangster. I'm an alcoholic who had a marked ability to screw things up. I was not some predatory criminal by intent. But I was a guy who did a lot of illegal stuff. I mean, it was just, I didn't see, it was the food chain where I lived. That was the way it worked. And so one day somebody rolled me, the next day I'd roll him. It was just one of those things. That's the way the economy worked in that place. And so I'm not hunting anybody to make amends. That's just the way it was. And never want to forget that. I never want to forget what it was like to wander the face of this earth with no place to comfortably call home. There were places I could go, but no place I could call home. To live in constant dirt and shame and embarrassment, humiliation, degradation, total loss of self-respect. God knows I never want to forget that nothing existence. That's the dilemma of alcoholism. It's not how many jails or broken noses or fights or that stuff. It's about what happens to a human being losing the ability to function as a human. that desperate kind of death march of alcoholism, that emptiness that's just there, and living in omnipresent fear and loneliness and separation and isolation like folks rarely know. And I never want to forget that for 1 second. It'd be nice, many of you know, that mine was a story that was to contain great tragedy, not in terms of what happened to me, but in terms of what I did. Unfortunately, I was brought to a stop many times, but unfortunately not enough. You know what I'm talking about in a minute, but many times I see people who are moaning the blues about getting arrested for driving under the influence. God only knows I would give anything on God's green earth if I'd have had one more. Because I wound up doing the kind of thing that most alcoholics have feared doing. Thank God most don't. For most alcoholics, the nightmares are bad dreams, but sometimes they're very real nightmares. And I woke up one morning in jail in Flint, no novelty. That was a common occurrence. It was one of my more common addresses. And I assumed I was in there for the same as always, either whatever, fighting, hustling, whatever on the street. And that's what it would normally be. And when I was awake a while, the jailer came by, I knew him well, asked him when I could get out. And he said, I hope never, and walked off. And I had not a clue what he was talking about. And then somebody told me that the night before I'd been driving somebody's car down the main street of the city, and it ran down and killed 2 people. And my response, I guess, was understandable. I understand now that the mind will only take in what it could handle. And my response was just to shut it out and refuse to believe it, and then gradually accepted the truth. And I'll tell you, I don't care how diminished you might be, you don't balance the scales between a street drunk and 2 fine young folks with their lives in front of them, no matter what. And that's the only time I'd ever been in jail. I didn't try to get out. I didn't want out. I was afraid to get out. I was ashamed to get out. I was ashamed to be breathing when 2 young folks no longer were because of me. And so I never made any effort to get out. But somebody, I don't even know who, I think it had to be a policeman there at the jail, I think, learned that I had family in North Carolina and how to contact them, and contacted, I had a mother and sister there, and they told them they had a boy up there in a lot of trouble. And so they came up. I didn't know how to tell them that I didn't want out of there. They got an attorney and negotiated my release on bond. I was charged with manslaughter. And I knew. Now, I stayed in there 76 days before I was released. And you know, some people tell you that alcoholism, if it gets serious enough, you'll stop. Don't believe that stuff. 76 days, and when I walked out of the jail, I knew, without any question whatsoever, that I could never pick up a drink as long as I lived. How could you? How could you? Unless you understand the nature of this illness, it's the most unlikely time. I got out, stayed sober a day and a half, walking the streets. I didn't know what to do with myself, couldn't stand to be around anybody. And then, of course, I started to drink. From July to November of '56, I drank literally like nobody I've ever seen. And that takes in a lot of territory. I've worked with thousands and thousands of alcoholics. I've never worked with one like me. I held an alcoholic in my arms while he died back in the old days, says, when there was no treatment. He wasn't like me. Even as he died, he was still protesting that he was not like us. I was a guy who just gave into the condition as a young man. and obviously that didn't work. But I stayed blind drunk from July to November of '56. And then on the 19th of November was the date of my last drink. That's not the date of my sobriety. It's the date of my last drink. There's a difference in that. And that day I went to court to be tried on a manslaughter charge. And I knew when I went I would not be back. It was to be a one-way trip, and I knew that. And I was tried, again, convicted, of course. I couldn't testify. I couldn't tell them what they had to tell me what I'd done. And I was, of course, found guilty and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in a Michigan State penitentiary. Now, I'd been in jail, God knows, all over the place. But it was always short-term drunk tanks, P-farms, stockades in the military, stuff like that. It was never, and I knew where I was going was not a drunk tank. It was Jackson Prison, and I'm no judge of prison. Well, I've been around a lot of them, but I've been to a lot of them in this country, and I would to this day I would rate it as the second or third worst penitentiary in America. And so when I walked in there, I had no illusions about where I was going, nor any grave concern. When I walked into that place, chained with 5 other guys, I knew that I would never come out of there alive. and I truly did not care. And it wasn't bitterness or cynicism. It was just, I was done. All I wanted to do was disappear. And when I put me in there, you talk about isolation. I was talking about isolation being a significant part of this illness, and surely it was. I'll just say this about isolation. It was central to my development of this problem. It was relieved appreciably by alcohol for a good while, and then it turned on me and made me more isolated than ever. It wasn't caused by alcohol. Certainly it isn't relieved by taking alcohol away. And so when I sobered up in that penitentiary, I was as isolated as anybody I've ever met. I was like a guy literally in a coma. I never talked with people. I never engaged in any conversation that I recall unless somebody asked me a direct question. And thank God, one day a guy asked me a direct question that started to change the course of my life. A fellow called me out for an interview who worked there, a social worker, and he talked with me about my drinking. A lot of people had done that. My God, I'd been diagnosed by everybody who ever met me, and it was always the same. You're a drunk, you're an alcoholic, you're crazy, whatever. But the only diagnosis I ever had was alcoholic or drunk. And I always got good advice like, why don't you quit? But I never understood that there was any such thing as help for alcoholics. Sis, I'm sure you ran the same thing. I never heard of anybody helping an alcoholic. First time I ever heard the notion of somebody helping an alcoholic, it sounded just weird to me. Because you don't help alcoholics. You hit them upside the head with a blackjack and put them in jail. That's what you do with alcoholics. I had never heard of anybody helping somebody. So this guy exclaimed about the problem like others had. Then he added something nobody else ever had. He said, we have an AA group here, and I think you ought to go. That wasn't an order. I mean, I didn't get captured or anything like that. The guy just said, you got this problem. They fixed it. You ought to go over there. It was essentially the way he put it. And he didn't try to tell me anything about it. I'm glad of it because I don't think he knew anything. They just taught him at Michigan State, when you get a guy in here and he's got a jacket like this, it's all about booze, tell him to go to AA. I had never heard of AA in my life. Never. They didn't talk about it where I drank, that's for sure. And so I walked in, and I honestly believe the only reason that I walked into that first meeting was that, have you ever been so beaten down that you just didn't have the fight, to resist? That's what it was. I think I was just beaten down like a noodle, and I had no resistance. I just sort of walked in like the living dead, and walked into my first meeting. It was a big meeting, 300 guys in that group, and I walked in. One fellow spoke to me, an officer on the door, looked at my name, Ivester, and I said, yes, sir, sit down. And I sat down and listened to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was the beginning point. Well, all of that was part of the beginning. But this was the first visible evidence of something new. And I walked in that day totally unprepared, probably like you were at your first one. Not having a clue what they were going to do, sat down and listened to the proceedings. Ran very much like this one here tonight, with a couple of exceptions. Read the same, no, I didn't read how it worked. Read steps, traditions, a little something out of that illegal little black book that we used to read all over the world. And it read the minutes of the meeting. I never could figure out why we kept minutes. There was no business. I mean, you just say, Mike came in and spoke, didn't say anything, spoke anyway, something like that. And so they read that, and they prayed, and I expected to pray. I knew that you wasn't going to help no drunks without praying. But I remembered all that stuff at county jail. There used to be a lot of clean old folks would come in there, and they'd offer to help drunks, You get up to the bar, and they'd say some nice stuff to you. And then they'd always sing Amazing Grace. God, I love the song. But I mean, when I'm an emotional wreck, that thing just sets me to blubbering, So they'd sing Amazing Grace, and I'd cry like a baby and get converted to whatever they were selling. And it'd last about 30 minutes. I thought that was our national anthem for a long time. And so they did all that. And then they introduced the speaker. It was a speaker meeting that day. And the guy who spoke at my first meeting later became my first sponsor, and I loved him better than Peter loved the Lord. But that day I thought the guy was Looney Tunes. I really did. He got up and told a story I wouldn't have told anybody the drunkest I'd ever been. I wouldn't have told nobody that. That guy was crazy. And he made me feel like a country club drunk. And well, I'm sorry to tell you the story about it. I won't, because I got to hurry. We got stuff to do. I didn't identify with it. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that it was 2 years. I didn't spell it out, but it was 2 years in this program before I ever identified with a single person in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, 24-year-old alcoholics were not coming off the production line. My sweetheart was I want to ask her how old she was. She's probably younger than that. She was close to it anyway, because that girl is something. I'm lonely. I'm here for... Oh, my God, tape. There weren't any 24-year-olds. And man, I felt hopelessly out of place here. I didn't believe I was alcoholic. I've been drunk all my life, but I didn't believe I was alcoholic. I really thought that I was a budding rocket scientist waiting to happen. That's really what I believed. I really did believe I had potential. And I tell you the darn truth, I think I do. One of these days, man, I'm going to get it together. But what happened that day was tremendously important in that I didn't identify with the guy. But the next week, I found myself right back there. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I didn't have any desire to get into Alcoholics Anonymous. I never did have any desire to get sober. I never saw anybody that was sober that looked like they liked it. Everybody I ever saw sober looked sober. I mean, God knows, they just dried up. God, drunk was bad enough. And so I didn't have any real leaping response to Alcoholics Anonymous. But the next week I was back. And I honestly believe that the only thing that brought me back to that second meeting was the magnetic enthusiasm that was the life of Shy Walker. I'm a great believer and lover of enthusiastic people because I think they constitute a vital healing force in Alcoholics Anonymous. And man, we're blessed with people like that. You know people, I guarantee you I know people, who can walk into a room and the minute they walk in, the climate changes. They don't have to do a thing. Thank God for people like that. Because that is the only thing that brought me back. If somebody had asked me why I was there, nobody did. But if somebody had, I couldn't have told them. I just found myself back over and over and over again. Miserable. I didn't like Alcoholics Anonymous. The first few months I was in AA, I was kind of operating with two minds. Psychologists call it approach avoidance behavior, I've been taught. You know, on the one hand, I would hear people tell their stories about getting it together and getting rich and famous and all that. And I'd find myself thinking a little hopeful thoughts like, you think that could work for a guy like me? And then on the other, I'd think about what sobriety looked like, and I'd find myself very fearfully saying, oh my God, what if it works? Now this thing's going to kick in and I'm going to be struck bone dry and I'll never have any more fun the longest day I live. I never knew what sober people did. Apparently not much. I won't go forward with this, but I'll just suggest this. There's one thing that's peculiar to recovery from alcoholism. With males, I don't know what women do, but with males, there's a little interval when there's a little bit of performance doubt. You know, whether you're going to be able to, you know, well, we didn't have Viagra back then. Well, the good news is that passes. You know, the best I can tell, it goes past 68 years. I think. But now, when it starts to come back, your mind will start to move forward a little bit, fast forward. Now, I didn't have any immediate problems about sex, none that I wanted to solve. Anyway, probably been a lot of willing participants there, but I wasn't sure which end of the action I was going to be in on, Well, it's just one of those things. I thought, what do sober people do about something like that? Hey, what do? Go down to Baptist church and hit on somebody? That just was a total. And I know y'all never worry about any stuff like that, but golly, it caused me some concern. And so I'm thinking of this getting sober business, and I'll tell you what happened. I'm somebody who I've got some pretty strong beliefs about some stuff, and of course it's born of my experience. When I look back to that young guy, if you could picture that fellow, 24-year-old human wrecking ball, a guy that screwed up everything he's ever touched, living under an absolute mountain of guilt, not convinced at all that I even had the problem, not hungry for the solution, not even lukewarm, and have never looked back. What does it take to take a life like that and turn it around? My first hurdle was to be willing to live, never mind sober, to be willing to take my place and step up to the plate again in life. That was the first hurdle. And I'll tell you what happened that was profoundly important to me. One, that guy that I just talked about, Shy, that fellow who demonstrated by his being that there might be life after sobriety. Thank God for that man. Thank God for that man and the hope that he gave. I'll always be grateful to the group that I belonged to in Jackson Prison. It was Recovery Group was an excellent group of Alcoholics Anonymous. By any standard, by any measure. I belong to a strong group now. It was no better than the one there. That one saved my life. And I'll always be grateful. The first place, groups are tremendously important to me. I was a guy who had very little time for words. I didn't believe words. I didn't believe people. I didn't trust anybody. The first place I ever learned trust in my life was in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I saw a group of self-described, reckless, irresponsible people taking extremely responsible actions. And I learned that there were people who did exactly what they said they were going to do, exactly like they said they were going to do it. And that was the first group of humans I ever trusted, 300 hairy-legged convicts in a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first power that I ever believed in my life with any depth or reality was the power that I sensed in that gathering of 300 convict AA members. Now, I'm not talking about collective muscle. I'm talking about a power that generated and flowed through that room. And I felt it. The first power I ever believed in was that power. The first one I ever sincerely prayed to was that power. When we say we came to believe, thank God we put no criteria on the belief. If anybody had tried to tell me the logic of that kind of belief, I'd have put a net on them. But that's exactly. In this program, we learn very quickly that this ain't about getting good. This is about getting well. And it's about starting where I am and not where I think I ought to be. And if I don't do that, I'll guarantee you it'll miss the target. So I'll be deeply grateful for that group the longest I live. It'll always be my home group. I just don't want to be a regular member. I go up every once in a while and make sure I ain't there and to visit whoever he is. But I'll always be thankful for that. I'll always be thankful for the guys who walked in, the people who came in and visited that institution. People who didn't know me from Adam's house cat could only assume that I was some kind of a horrible dude, but who stuck out an unquestioning hand of acceptance and concern. I never had one single person ask me an inappropriate question, an embarrassing question, or to challenge me about anything. People who treated me like a gentleman long before I even considered what one might be like. I'll always be grateful for that I was welcomed in here with dignity and concern and caring by people who walked that. Always be grateful for that. I'm going to head for the home stretch. I don't want to make any loose promises here, but I'm going to head for the home stretch. There's a place in our book where it talks about the thing I want to just get at a little bit. That in Doc's opinion, there's a place that says something like, I can't quote anything. I'm lying if I quote it. but you'll recognize it. It says, frothy emotional appeal won't cut it for an illness of the gravity of ours. Now, it doesn't say it that way, but that's what it means. That for an illness of this magnitude, frothy emotional appeal won't do it. And frothy emotional appeal to me is fellowship. You know, what we're doing here can be frothy emotional appeal. It's a good time. This is a celebration of sobriety. This is not Bedrock Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a group of us coming together to celebrate and enjoy the fellowship and love each other. That's what this is. Fellowship won't do it. See, I'm going to have to get on that plane tomorrow and I'll be by myself. And if all I've got is the warm memories of St. Louis, Missouri, and trouble comes, I'll be in a heap of trouble. Frothy emotional appeal won't do it. Feel good stuff. My God, every time I get around somebody and they tell me, oh, geez, I've been sober 11 months, 9 months, and I haven't even thought about a drink. My God, this thing is just working great. And I always hear the rest of the sentence that's unspoken, and I never will. Frothy emotional appeal. Now, it's nice. Nothing wrong with it. But it's tough to try to live with that. You know, that little piece goes on to say that frothy emotional appeal won't do it. We have to have a solution that has depth and weight. Depth and weight. What I've learned is that now that wisdom in Alcoholics Anonymous it's not made up of how much I know, of how many things I have knowledge about. Wisdom in AA comes from the depth with which I understand. Depth and weight. And I'll tell you where that started to occur for me. I didn't intend to do it, but I've always been a reader. I read everything that we had. It wasn't much back then, but I read it all. And so intellectually I was aware of the terminology of the program, the design of the program, but there's a huge difference between the words and the action. And so I went to a meeting one day, fat, dumb, and happy. I wasn't too happy, but I was fat and dumb. And went in, didn't mean to do anything life-changing, sat down, listened to the meeting. The speaker was a guy from this town that I came out of. And he spent the entire meeting talking about nothing but our fourth step. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And he went into great detail, spent an entire hour talking about that step, his experience. He read part of it out of the book, stressed the importance of writing it. And when he got through, I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I'd been thinking a little bit. That's dangerous to be mentally inventorying. But I was, of course, inventorying. It was basically pondering the question of how did such a nice guy as me get in such a mess, is what I meant to inventory. And so I went back to my cell and got the old legal pad and sat down to write. I meant to write a little story about life's cruelties and what a victim of circumstances I was. I'll tell you this, just a quick little sad story. You may want to get your napkin ready. It's a sad story. My family, well, it didn't break up. My dad left. I mean, he just left when I was 4 years old. And I knew when he left, I didn't know where he was going, but I knew he wasn't coming back. I don't know how, but I knew it. And he didn't. And that dude was gone. Now, I tell you, that's a little bit jarring to a youngster. But I'll tell you what was worse. My mother found another one. And she brought a guy home a couple years later. And I swear to God, that was the scummiest dude I have ever seen in my life. I don't mean to offend any vertically impaired people, but he was just a little old runt of a guy and just gross. I mean, gross. That sucker. I despised him the day he drove up. I mean, I flat didn't like him. And I had an older sister I used to have. She's now an identical twin by some magic. But she was old enough that she called that thing Alvin. And I was young enough I had to call it Daddy. And every time I called that sucker Daddy, I would just burn. And every time he would make me irritated, which was about every 30 minutes, I just absolutely lit it. And I promised myself if I ever got big enough, I was going to beat him like a drum. And then I went off to the military, came back, I was too big. I couldn't whip that little old runt. And I wanted to. I didn't like him. I mean, I really didn't. The old fool finally died. And I don't even like him dead. I tell you, I still don't like him. To the untrained eye, that might look like a resentment. Whatever it is, I'm going to keep it. I don't like that cat. And I go by every once in a while where he's buried to make sure he hadn't dug out. You know, but yeah, that's what I meant to write about. I mean, my God, anybody grew up under that kind of perverse condition would be a little warped, and I was, so that's what I meant to write. Boy, were the founders wise when they said to write the inventory. Because I sat down and started to write about that ludicrous thing, and then with absolutely no intent whatsoever, it was as if I hit a brick wall. And all at once the charade was over. All at once I think I saw the futility of that, and Hemingway called it the moment of truth, the moment when a person comes face to face with himself. And that's what happened. I didn't plan that whatsoever, but all I know is that all at once it stopped, and almost in one motion, it was like the floodgates opened. And I just absolutely poured out, nothing thoughtful, nothing in columns, nothing analytical. What I poured out was the tortured life of a young guy in the treadmill to oblivion. That's exactly what I just poured out, that thing. When I got through, I had 3 pages of hopeless scribble. Nobody could have read it. Nobody was supposed to read it. That was my inventory. But I'll tell you what else it was without question the most important day's work I have ever done in my entire life. Bar none. Bar none. More important than the day I married my wife, when my son was born, my daughter, more important by far, because without that event, none of the other would have happened, and if it did, it would have been better if it hadn't. Because that day is something tremendously important to me. There's a place in our book where, in that description of alcoholism, where it talks about losing the ability, and then it goes on to say something central to me. It's something like this, that we learned that we had to concede, fully concede, to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. Very, very, very important. You know, I told you in the beginning that I'm Tom Ivester, an alcoholic. That's not what that's about. That's about communication. That's about identification. That's about saying, hey, guy, you won, I am too. Let's talk. That's not the level. Concede is a different word. That's a very private word. That's a very personal word. And it's a word you use when you know that it's all over. It's done. It's done. There are no more angles. It's done. I fought a hell of a fight, but I lost, man. I got knocked colder than a mackerel. That day, I knew without any question whatsoever that I was alcoholic, period. Alcoholic, period. Not the youngster, not the whiz kid, not the tragic case. I'm an alcoholic. I'm somebody who, if I take a drink, my life goes to hell in a handbasket, and I know that. I can't drink. The fight is over. It's over. That day I became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't sign anything, didn't have to. But from that day to this day, I have never been in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous without knowing 100% why I'm there. Not once from that day to this have I ever been the lost, tragic face in the group. I'm a man on a mission. I'm a man with a purpose. I'm a man who knows what he's doing here. So it changed the character of things. That's where it really started. And so when that kicked in, I started to go to work in this thing, and that really was a turning point in my life. For some reason, I want to talk about this just a little bit tonight. That what that started was solidifying the place I was, and it gave me the foundation to work. Strange program, ours. It would be a snap if it was about achievement or attainment or skill development. My God, we'd be a total world of winners. But it isn't. It's about surrender. It's about surrender at depth so that a new life can start to occur. I've never known a long-term, solid recovery that wasn't born of surrender. Not a one. Not a one. And so that's what happened. And then it was a matter of just putting the rest of it in and starting to, met with a guy and opened up just this brief moment about steps. Yeah, but that was important to me because for the first time I understood what I was talking about when I said I was an alcoholic. I understood for the first time what defects of character were, that it wasn't naughty behavior, that it was the forces that drove my life. It was that warped and twisted way that I related to the world. And in 5, I finally opened up to the first human I ever opened up to in my life and shared the intimate, deepest, darkest secrets of my life. And what a truly liberating thing. What a truly profound impact it was on that wall of isolation that had imprisoned me my entire life. That man sitting on a park bench in a penitentiary became the first human who knew me. And what a great step into some freedom. In 6 and 7, it was the decision if I'm going to do something or not. Am I going to just sort of screw around? Am I going to settle down and really try to do something here? And I want to just say, for some reason, I don't know why, I don't normally get into this much, but I just want to say something about amends. That, obviously, from what I've said, that you could gather that there were considerable amends to make and some that were unbelievably difficult. That what I tried to do was to follow this program the way it's laid out the best I knew how. And I just talk about the one that seemed impossible when we're taking the lives of people. Yeah, I'm one who believes that character defects are what drive my life. They're what the bondage of self's about. And I'm one who believes that I will never be free till I go back and address and make right all of those things. Every time I misused, screwed over, abused somebody, I didn't outslick them. I paid for that with a piece of my soul. And I'll never be a free man till I go back and make those things right. The one that I never thought I'd be able to, how do you deal with it when you've taken the lives of 2 people? And you believe me, I was hungry for anything that would give me any clue about how to deal with that. Even drunk, I had tried to communicate to the families whether they would be willing to see me. Even drunk, I knew that was something needed to be done, and they said, "Leave us alone, leave us alone." And of course, you got to respect that. And then when I got sober and started to get into doing the amends, and came to that step of becoming, making a list of people with harm, becoming willing to make amends, that's all I could do. And I did everything I heard of. I wrote letters to them. I pictured their faces. I prayed with their presence in mind. I did everything I could think of to do directly to the victims. But of course, the real amend that was difficult was with the families, because they were the people who'd had to tremendous. How do you deal with that? And our step is brilliant in the way it lays it out, that we become willing. Well, I became willing, and I prayed for the opportunity. And I swear to you, I never did anything to engineer any situation where I would have the opportunity. I had a willing heart, a willing heart. And one day I got a phone call from Michigan after I was out, and the guy asked me if I would be willing to come up and testify at a trial, and I said, I don't know what I can do. I mean, I can't. What I testify? I don't know anything. And he said, we think it would help if you came. And what it was, one of the families were suing. That man, I tell you, you talk about something that you'd hunger to be true. They're trying to state that somebody else had caused the accident, they called it. But the folks had jumped to avoid another car and jumped into mine. Well, I don't know. And it didn't matter if that were true. Because when you're driving blind drunk, it's like firing a bullet down the street and hoping it doesn't hit somebody. Now, there is no mitigation for that kind of thing. So I wrote that off, tempting though it was. And so I went to that court and testified to my ignorance and testified to, I guess, to what blackouts are like. And when we got through, and God knows I don't know why, but the judge who heard that case put me and the families and nobody else in a room. We become willing and we pray for the opportunity. And I'll guarantee you, I had rather been anywhere on earth than where I was. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. But I had to do that. And so I went to one family, said what I had to say, and tried to make amends as best I could, and told them what I wanted to do with my life. Went to the other family, and they were a first-generation couple from one of the Mideast countries, and they were very stark in how they saw things, and they listened to me courteously. Excuse me, and then said, "No, just leave us alone. We can't forgive." Well, my heart went out to them. The other family was free. The other family had turned loose. This family couldn't turn loose. And so my heart went out to them. I have great sympathy for them because of living in that. The power of this step is that I had done everything humanly possible for me to do without imposing injury on somebody else. And I walked away free of that need to try to rectify. And then the rest of it, I'm somebody who believes that amends are about change. And what that has done is that it's influenced everything that I've done for the last 44 years, because it's a part of how I live. See, I can't go back and undo that, but I can live my life today in such a way that I might make contributions where I used to deliver destruction. It's an amazing thing. It's the last thing I'll say about it, but amazing thing. I've prayed for opportunities to make contributions like that, and that event happened on the 3rd of May of 56. It is almost inconceivable if I told you the number of things that have happened on May 3rd that I had absolutely nothing to do with. May 3rd, one year, I talked to 5,000 young people in one day in 2 groups on May 3rd, just about the ages of the ones I killed. On May 3rd, I made a movie about drunk driving and the dangers, an anonymous movie. I told my experience. And it's a strange thing about anonymity in AA. They did that Rubik's Cube thing. You know how they do it? That's what I call it, how they put that stuff that make you not recognizable. They disguise my voice. I've never seen them, but I haven't seen it to this day. I don't have a clue what it is. But a woman called me from North Dakota and said, "Tom, did you make a movie?" And I said, "No, I don't think. I wasn't thinking. I thought she was talking about Hollywood or something." I said, "No, they haven't found me yet." And she told me what it was, and it dawned on me. I said, "My God, how did you know it was me?" And she said, "I recognized your nose." Anonymity is wishful thinking. The healing power of this program and the freedom that comes is absolutely unbelievable. And because of the power of this thing, in a maximum custody penitentiary, I became a functioning member of Alcoholics Anonymous, a richly rewarded member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first day of freedom I ever knew in my life, I was locked up like an ape in a zoo. There was absolutely nothing that humans consider important, and I became a free man. First place I ever experienced real joy was in a maximum custody penitentiary. And so I finally got out of that place, and it doesn't take a genius to get out, it just takes time. And so they finally told me they'd let me go if I'd agree to go to North Carolina. I didn't want to do that, but I did. And when I left, it was a big deal, but all I had to do was just keep doing what I was already doing. And so I hit the ground running like a wild goat. And I just want to kind of wrap up on, not quickly, but I'll wrap up on the amazing things that happened, really. When I left that penitentiary, I knew that my lifeline was Alcoholics Anonymous. There was no question about that. And I had, I guess, the little dreams that men have in those kinds of situations, that if they really mean to do something with their lives. I didn't have big dreams. I wanted to be free physically. I wanted to have an opportunity to be in a community and be a citizen in a community. I never had been. I'd always been a guy who tore up communities. I never built anything constructive in my life. I wanted to be a citizen. I wanted to be part of a family. I'd never really been a part of a family. And I wanted to have some honest work, just this little dreams that folks have. And when I got out, and I went to work night shift in a mill on the 3rd shift, 10 at night till 6 in the morning. I could make meetings within a 30-mile radius. Some I had to skip the Lord's Prayer, but I could make those meetings, and my sister drove me to a ton of them. and a lot of AA members drove me to a ton of them. And I tell you, some things happened. 2 weeks after I was out, guys in my group worked with a little prison. We had an AA group over there. They worked with, and they asked me to go with them. I said, man, they're not going to let me in that place. They may not let me out. And they said, that's okay. So I went. And 2 weeks later, I'm back. Well, I wasn't carrying a message. I was just sort of carrying a body in there. And 2 months after I was out, I was asked to be outside sponsor of that. You know, what a tremendous affirmation to be out of a maximum custody joint. And 2 months later, I'm the outside sponsor, a trusted servant in just that short order. What a tremendous thing. Couldn't have been more grateful if I'd have been elected governor. About the same time. Now, I'm a very practical man. I believe in miracles, but I have a very practical kind of definition of miracles. To me, miracles are what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And God handles the introduction. It's an amazing thing when I was talking about surrender, that the new life comes when surrender comes, when preparation happens, opportunity comes. And that's sort of the way things went in my life. 2 months after I was out, when I was outside sponsor, my parole supervisor came to me, said, Tom, you're real active in this AA thing. And I said, yes, sir. And it concerned me because I thought he was going to ask me to slow down, or tell me to slow down. And I knew I wouldn't. And he said, wouldn't it help you if you could drive? And I said, yes, sir, but I can't, like he didn't know. And he said, well, let me check it out. A short while later, he called me and asked me to meet him at the Sears store uptown and where we lived. That's where the license agency was. My sister drove me up. The story is absolutely true in every detail. She drove me up. I was parked in front of Sears. I could see all the way back. It was one long room. And back in the back, I saw my guy, the pro supervisor, and a guy I didn't know standing there talking. And so I walked in. He introduced me to the guy. He was the driver's license examiner. We talked, visited about something. When he got through visiting, he handed me a driver's license. No test, road, verbal, written, none. Didn't even ask me if I could drive. Handed me a driver's license. Didn't even pay for it. Didn't even pay for it. You know that's illegal, Dan. There's no way that you can do that. I've had people tell me I must have been powerfully connected politically. You bet. You bet. Yeah, the sheriff and I were intimate. So. And I tell you what I honestly believe. Talk about miracles and preparation. I believe that when we're prepared and God's got work for us to do, the walls come down. And I don't care what they are. I know that on my basis of my own life, and God knows how many other unbelievable stories that I've been privileged to share in Alcoholics Anonymous. 5 months after that, I was elected DCM. I'd gone to 2 years at Michigan State while I was in there, on television, but I couldn't spell DCM at that point. And I got elected to the tremendous honor. Same guy who wondered if he'd ever be trusted by anybody, here I am, trusted as a trusted servant by my best friends in 12 cities. What a tremendous honor. 2 years after that, I was sitting home one day minding my own business, got a phone call from the state capitol. A guy I'd met one time. He worked with the prison system, and he introduced himself and asked for Mr. Ivester, and we talked a minute, and he said, Mr. Ivester, we're expanding the rehabilitation program in our prison system, and we were wondering if you would consider taking a position in that. And the first thing I said to him was, man, do you know who you're talking to? And he said, yeah, we probably know you better than you know yourself. And of course, they'd check me out. There had never been an ex-con in history hired anything like that, and I knew they weren't going to start with me. To him, I said, good God, I'd rather do that than anything I could imagine. It had never occurred to me, or anybody else. Inside, you know what I said. There ain't no way. But sure enough, I was employed 2 years out of prison. I was employed as a supervisor, rehab supervisor in the prison system in North Carolina. Loved it better than you could imagine. Loved it dearly. I didn't take a vacation for 9 years. I just absolutely loved what I was doing. I was duking it out with the guys and loving every minute of it. And one day, the head of our system asked me to come by his office and said he had an assignment for me. He would normally want me to pinch hit for him when he asked me to do that. And so I went by and he said, Tom, I'd like for you to take over an institution as warden. And I thought, my God, when I got up off the floor, I said, hey, boss, man, I don't want to be the man. I don't want to be the screw that turned. And he told me what he had in mind. And I said, will you let me think about it? He said, certainly. Take 5 minutes. So I took 5 minutes, went out, paced up and down, prayed hard, went back in and said, I'll do it. And that started an unbelievable 20-year career of running institutions. My specialty was developing institutions. I've always been I'm a guy that I like to build, I like to develop, I like to do stuff. When I design a program, I'm working on the next change the next day. That's just the way I think. And so that was my deal. I just finished up my career, 39-year career in December. And I'll tell you, brother, if you want Thank you very much. My wife applauded till she saw what I was going to do in retirement. And if you want a real seminar on how to retire, when word got around that I was going to retire, and I was talking to the guys that there, that it's amazing how many projects people think of that you're just ideal for. And the day I retired, I had already been elected as the North Carolina chairman for the Correctional Facilities AA Committee on retirement. So I had about a 3-second interval between my employment and my full-time volunteer status. So right now I'm busier than I've ever been in my life, and I'm having more fun than I've ever had in my life. I'm having a great time. And so that was been a marvelous thing. I'm a guy that I'm an ordinary fellow. I've had some extraordinary experiences, and I'm not some glamorized ex-con. I'm somebody who not only had marvelous opportunities, but I took the preparation to do it. I did manage to get my education in correctional administration, and I finished 39 years as a professional in the field. I'm not as some glamorized ex-con. Whether my colleagues knew I was ex-con or not, I don't know. It didn't really matter. It just never was an issue. I took my place in the world, which I think is what we're supposed to do. I am an average guy. Sis can attest. Whether I want to or not, I'm becoming an old timer. It just happens. If you stay here long enough, it happens. And so the question is not whether I'm going to become this. It's about what kind am I going to be. I'm somebody. Michael and I were talking about the huge gap between where I left off and where you picked up with 31. That's a huge gap, and you wonder where the folk are. Now it's their business where they are. But I swear to God, I've never had any curiosity to go find out. I'm somebody who just loves what I'm doing here. And so when I think about what kind of an old-timer I want to be, I'm choosy about that. Now, I want to be somebody who is a good example. If I tell you I've been sober 44 years, I want to be somebody who looks and acts like he's sober 44 years and that this program works. I don't want to be some bitter, weazened-up old dude who won't even give you his attention. If you talk to me, I want to acknowledge you. I want to see you. I want to hear you. I want to let you know that you're there and that I'm here. I want to be somebody who makes AA an attractive place to be. I don't want to be somebody who brings cold water on everything that's done. Now, I want to be somebody who adds to this thing. I want to be a decent leader. A certain amount of leadership accrues to you when you stay here long enough. And I want to be a decent leader. I want to be somebody who stands tall for what this program's about. I want to be as good a member as I'm capable of being. I want to be as knowledgeable as I can be. I want to understand the issues so that when decisions have to be made, I can help make responsible decisions. I want to be involved in every element of Alcoholics Anonymous and give it my undivided attention and support. I want to honor what we do in our organized structure of service, because we can't get by on just gala celebrations. There is nitty-gritty work that has to be done. So I want to honor that. I want to pay attention to that. I want to give my undivided loyalty to that. So that's the kind I want to be. I want to be a decent example of recovery. And so I do that. I'm a group man. I belong to a very strong home group. And that's where I do that for two reasons. One, because I like to be in a strong group. The other is that's where I do my work. That's where I do my work. My purpose, my mission in life, self-assigned, but it's my mission. I want to be sure that the next man, woman, boy, or girl who comes into AA where I am gets as good as I was given. And so my group is where I do that. If I don't have a group that supports and delivers the kind of stuff that I spout, then I'm doing a con job on folks. So I want a strong group where people have got a good chance to recover, where they learn the legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can do that. I'm somebody who believes in sponsorship. I sponsor an awful lot of people. About the right number, I think. I don't know how many it is, but it's a gang of good folks, and we have a good time. And I have a sponsor, and he has a sponsor. I believe in that. That's my most tangible link to Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's who I am. The way I look at it is this, and I'll leave you with this kind of a word picture. The way I look at it is that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was a pretty lost cat. I was a really beat-up young guy, totally devoid of hope. And when I came in, there was a guy that reached over and took my hand. Basically said, "Hey, guy, come on, walk with us." And then I got my balance. And I reached over and took another guy's hand and said, "Come on, guy, walk with us." And that's what this is about. It's about a chain reaction of love and service. And whether we want to be or not, we're a link in that chain. Maybe a good one, maybe a bad one. But I'll guarantee you we're a link. We're a link that either makes it stronger or makes it weaker. I'm a guy in his 44th year of recovery who's having the best year I have ever had in my life. Some folks will tell you that when you come into AA, you've got a predictable cycle to look forward to. That you'll come in, and when it sort of hits with you, you'll sort of take off up to a pink cloud stage, and then you'll stay on that for a period, and then you'll level off to mediocrity or something. I don't know what you're supposed to level off. Well, I'm here to tell you that pink cloud stage lasts exactly as long as I do the things that put me there. I don't ever have to. I don't ever have to level off to mediocrity ever. So I hope and pray that every one of us will use this time this weekend, the inspiration that we've gained from each other, and take that sucker back. Take it where you go. Start a little revolution wherever you live. Make sure that the next alcoholic who walks in there gets a good time, gets a good shot. And if you're not on fire with this thing, if you're not deeply grateful to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're not enjoying this sucker up to your ears, for God's sakes, man, don't miss it. 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 Don't miss it.